There's a prototype chip sitting in a laboratory right now that violates every principle of modern computing. It doesn't try to eliminate noise, it harnesses it. It doesn't demand perfect precision, it embraces randomness. And instead of forcing transistors to behave cleanly at exact voltage levels with synchronized timing, it deliberately pushes them into unstable regions where they switch unpredictably, sometimes early, sometimes late, sometimes not at all. This isn't a malfunction, it's the entire point. What sounds like engineering catastrophe is actually a radical reimagining of computation itself, based on ideas that were abandoned 50 years ago because they were too slow for the technology of that era, but might be exactly what's needed for the computational challenges we face today. Everything we've built for the past 70 years, phones, laptops, data centers, the entire internet, operates on one fundamental assumption. Reality can be represented perfectly in zeros and ones, that computation requires absolute precision, that noise and randomness are enemies to be eliminated. But that assumption starts breaking down when you look at how nature actually works. In biology, cells divide with tiny random errors, and that's precisely how evolution generates the variation that enables adaptation. In the brain, neurons fire irregularly with inherent randomness, and that noise appears to be essential for creativity and pattern recognition. Even in cosmology, stars explode chaotically, and from that disorder, new elements are forged. In nature, chaos isn't the enemy of creation, it's the engine. And maybe its time machines learned the same principle. What follows is the story of how randomness became a tool for understanding the universe, why that idea got abandoned in computing for half a century, and why it's suddenly returning not as theoretical curiosity, but as practical necessity for the computational demands of modern AI. The mathematician who saw patterns in chaos? The story begins over a century ago with a young Russian mathematician named Andrei Markov, who refused to accept the dominant scientific paradigm of his era. Most scientists believed the universe operated as a perfectly predictable machine, that if you knew the precise position and momentum of every particle, you could calculate everything that would ever happen. This deterministic worldview came from French mathematician Pierre-Simon Laplace, who imagined an all-knowing intellect that could perceive every atom and compute the entire future with perfect accuracy. No mystery, no randomness, total predictability. Markov saw something different. He observed randomness everywhere, in weather patterns, in musical compositions, in language structure, and he refused to dismiss it as mere ignorance of underlying causes. He became obsessed with a question most scientists avoided. Can randomness itself be predicted? Not perfectly, but statistically. He became convinced that what appeared as chaos actually followed certain patterns, and he set out to demonstrate it mathematically. His experiment was elegantly simple. He examined phenomena that looked unpredictable and measured how often one state followed another. If today is rainy, perhaps there's a 70% probability tomorrow will also be rainy and 30% chance it will be sunny. Critically, he didn't need the entire weather history to make that prediction, just the current state to estimate what comes next. The breakthrough came when he recognized that even randomness had structure. From one moment to the next, there were fixed probabilities of transitioning to each possible new state. Step by step, those probabilities formed a chain that eventually settled into stable patterns. This became known as a Markov chain, and it gave science something invaluable: a mathematical language for structured randomness. This framework became a universal tool for modeling evolution, molecular behavior, weather systems, economies, and eventually even artificial intelligence. Decades later, the same fundamental idea powered Google's PageRank algorithm and enabled DeepMind's AlphaZero to master complex games. A simple insight about randomness ended up transforming multiple scientific fields. And if you follow this thread to its conclusion, you'll see it's now beginning to transform computing hardware itself. When randomness became a computational tool, Markov's theoretical framework collided with practical necessity during the Manhattan Project, the race to build the first atomic weapon during World War II. Physicists at Los Alamos were trying to understand nuclear chain reactions, which are extraordinarily chaotic processes. Each neutron flies off randomly, potentially splits an atom, releases more neutrons that might trigger additional reactions or might not. The number of possible paths is astronomically large, making exact calculation essentially impossible with the tools available. One scientist, Stanisław Ulam, had a critical insight. What if instead of solving everything exactly, they could sample randomness itself? The principle is straightforward. If you repeat something random many times, the average result reveals the true underlying value. Flip a coin 5 times and you might get 4 heads and 1 tail, which seems wrong if true probability is 50%. But flip it 5,000 times and you'll get approximately 2,500 heads and 2,500 tails, much closer to the expected distribution. This is the law of large numbers. More trials produce more accurate results. Ulam realized that instead of solving every equation precisely, you could run thousands or millions of random trials and average the results. Do that, and you can predict the outcome of chaos statistically. He brought this idea to John von Neumann. Yes, that von Neumann, who had just designed the first computer architecture capable of storing and running its own programs, the fundamental blueprint behind every computer today. Together, they formalized Ulam's insight into rigorous mathematics, calling it the Monte Carlo method after the Monaco casino because it resembled gambling, randomness, large numbers, and the law of averages. This allowed them to understand how nuclear chain reactions would behave without tracking every individual particle, and it proved something profound. Randomness isn't just an obstacle to overcome, it can be a powerful computational tool. The Monte Carlo method spread rapidly from nuclear physics to weather prediction, financial modeling, biological simulation, and eventually to modern AI training. If randomness could help simulate nature, perhaps it could help us compute like nature does. The bold proposal that was too early? In 1953, John von Neumann made one of the most radical proposals in computing history. Every computer at that time, whether digital or analog, was designed to eliminate randomness, noise, and uncertainty. Those were problems to be solved, not resources to be exploited. But von Neumann saw it differently. He imagined machines that wouldn't rely on exact numbers or perfect component behavior, but could handle uncertainty and continue functioning even when parts failed, like brains, like biological systems, like nature itself. He proposed a completely new computing paradigm. Instead of calculating with precise values, computers could calculate using probabilities. Systems could be designed to get correct answers on average by using randomness itself as a computational resource. This was the birth of stochastic computing. Stochastic simply meaning something involving randomness that changes over time. Instead of representing 0.75 as a 32-bit precise number, he represented it as a random stream of zeros and ones where 75% are ones and 25% are zeros. Probability becomes data. The elegant part? These noisy little circuits could compute simply by counting how many ones appeared over time. Addition, multiplication, even adaptive learning could be performed using just a handful of basic logic gates. Von Neumann called it stochastic computing, and unlike many radical ideas, this one actually worked in practice. Von Neumann himself believed this might be the only viable path to building machines capable of genuine thinking. Across the Atlantic at the University of Manchester, researcher Gaines took the concept even further. His team built a machine called RASCEL, Random Access Stochastic Computing Experimental Logic. Constructed from analog noise generators and simple logic gates, computing information from random electrical pulses. From that chaos, correct results emerged. The team was astonished because RASCEL didn't just work. It demonstrated biological-like resilience. You could damage components and still get correct results on average. For a moment, it seemed unstoppable. But beneath the excitement lurked a fatal flaw. Stochastic circuits needed extremely long bit streams to achieve acceptable accuracy. Thousands of random bits to represent a single number. It was brilliant but unbearably slow. Worse, if bit streams became even slightly correlated, the mathematics collapsed entirely. In 1978, researchers held the first major conference on stochastic computing. Paper after paper reached the same quiet conclusion: elegant in theory, functional in practice, but too slow to survive commercial competition with increasingly fast binary processors. RASCEL was powered down. The world moved on. Why chaos is coming back? What makes this story compelling isn't just historical curiosity. It's that stochastic computing is returning, and not from nostalgia, but from necessity. Modern AI demands computational resources and energy at scales where data centers are hitting fundamental limits. Power grids can't supply enough electricity. Cooling systems can't dissipate enough heat. And critically, the problems AI needs to solve, from training neural networks to generating images and video, are fundamentally probabilistic in nature. Many modern scientific challenges, from simulating molecular behavior to training AI models to solving global optimization problems, can be described mathematically as stochastic differential equations. Even generative AI, like Stable Diffusion and video generation models, don't create content from nothing. They solve stochastic differential equations step by step, gradually transforming random noise into structured output. Under the surface, diffusion models are controlled stochastic processes. Here's where things get interesting. GPUs are designed for graphics and excel at matrix multiplication, but they're not optimized for solving stochastic differential equations. They can do it, but it's slow, power-hungry, and absurdly expensive at scale. There's enormous demand for more efficient approaches. This is where companies like Normal Computing are entering with a fundamentally different approach. Instead of forcing precise calculations through millions of steps, let physics do the work through many tiny random steps that find answers by sampling probabilities. How physics becomes mathematics. Understanding how stochastic computing actually works reveals why it's so radically different. In binary computing, numbers are stored precisely. But in stochastic computing, 0.75 gets represented as a random stream where 75% of bits are ones and 25% are zeros. The order doesn't matter, only the statistical distribution. Here's the elegant part. If you want to multiply two numbers represented this way, you simply feed them bit by bit through a basic AND gate. The output automatically becomes the product. If you multiply 0.5 by 0.5, feeding random streams through an AND gate produces an output where approximately 25% of bits are ones, which represents 0.25, the correct product. Why does this matter? Because in modern computers, multipliers are expensive. They use thousands of transistors, consume significant power, and occupy substantial chip area. In the stochastic approach, you can perform the same operation with a single simple gate. This saves enormous energy when scaled to the millions of operations underlying modern AI workloads. The catch: accuracy comes from the law of large numbers. More random samples produce closer approximation to true values. Stochastic computing trades speed for precision, the same trade-off that ended Russell in the 1960s. But today's AI doesn't need perfection. It needs speed and efficiency at scale. So here's where this radical idea stands today. A company is building prototype chips that deliberately operate transistors in unstable voltage regions where they behave unpredictably, capturing that randomness as a computational resource. Instead of millions of precise calculations, they let systems move through many tiny random steps, Markov chains where each step depends only on current state, with physics gently biasing the walk towards statistically correct solutions. Not heavy matrix mathematics, just tiny physical state changes where probability does the work. They've already built functional prototypes demonstrating that stochastic computing in silicon actually works for generative AI tasks. But significant challenges remain. This isn't general-purpose computing. It only works for problems describable as stochastic differential equations. Scaling behavior is uncertain. prototypes exist, but nobody knows how the architecture performs when thousands get connected like current GPU clusters. The idea is powerful, but not ready for widespread deployment yet. Engineering challenges remain substantial, but if those get solved, it could fundamentally redefine computation itself. Noise could replace multiplication, physics could replace mathematics, and what seems radical today might become the new normal. Because sometimes the future doesn't come from perfecting what exists, it comes from remembering what we abandoned and asking whether the reasons for abandoning it still apply.